We're going through a New Testament survey and reading through the New Testament, or at least parts of it. Hopefully you finished the book of Mark this week. If you have not, we'll give you another week to work on that. It is only 16 chapters. You can do it. You can do it. But now this portion of our topic is really on the ministry of Jesus. Next week we'll probably be diving in to look at summary of the books of the New Testament. We'll start with the Gospels. But I want to look at just a little overview of the ministry of Jesus. And just first of all, his ministry only lasted 3.5 years. That is not long at all. It ended, it depends on, not sure when Jesus exactly was born, but it depends on when he was born, but it either ended in 33 AD or 30 AD. And some scholars divide it into 3 categories. Just try to make more sense of it. The first year, divided into 3 categories, almost like one for each year. The first year was the year of obscurity. In other words, Jesus was walking around and a lot of people didn't know who he was. He'd do a miracle over here and some people would see it and then he'd do a miracle over here and his disciples were trying to understand who he was and what he's doing and things like that. But he wasn't super popular or famous yet. And then in his second year, he gets super popular. Everywhere he goes, he would do miracles and tell people, don't tell anybody. And I think every single time in the Bible where he told them not to tell anybody, guess what they would do? They would go tell, not just one person, they would go tell, and then next thing you know, Jesus wouldn't have any privacy, and he'd have a huge crowd there, and he got very popular. And then about his last year, the year of rejection, he was sort of rejected by his disciples as they fled from him, especially Peter, so forth, rejected them, but even rejected by the people as a nation, where they were yelling out, "Crucify him!" And it was rejected by the religious leaders of the day and even by the Roman government, and that is, then he becomes crucified. So, there's just some overall view of the ministry of Jesus, but today I want to look at just 2 specific sort of areas or categories of Jesus' ministry. And we're going to look at some evidence that is provided for each. We're going to look at evidence for miracles and evidence for the resurrection. Because these are some things that we don't think about a whole lot. Is there really any evidence that Jesus performed miracles? Well, I would argue that there's evidence from the Bible, and then there's also evidence outside of the Bible. Let's jump right in. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 9, verses 32 through 34. Verse 32, it says, "While they were going out, a man who was demon-possessed and could not talk was brought to Jesus. And when the demon was driven out, the man who had been mute spoke. The crowd was amazed and said, 'Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel.' But the Pharisees said, 'It is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons.'" Now this is a very important point because it's very interesting what his enemies, the non-believers, the skeptics, were saying. So here Jesus was. He went out and he did a miracle. He did a miracle. The man was possessed and couldn't speak. And then Jesus changed this man right before everybody's eyes. And were convinced and wow, and were amazed. But the Pharisees saw it. And one thing very interesting. This is very important. They didn't deny that something happened. Because they couldn't deny that something had happened because guess what? Something happened. And people saw it, and people were aware of it. They knew who this individual was. It wasn't like some total stranger that just walked in their town and maybe it was all set up and fake or something like that. But it wasn't like that. They even admit that something miraculous, something supernatural happened. So they had to come up for an explanation. They never denied the miracle. They just had to come up for an explanation for the miracle. And what was their explanation? Well, this was evil. This was demonic powers. He's been talking to demons. That's how he was able to do this. But they never denied that the miracle took place. And it's very interesting. I say this was the portion of evidence from the Bible, and we could have took many passages where Jesus is doing miracles here or there, and a lot of times the Pharisees had the same response. They tried to explain it away, but never did they say it never happened. Never. They never denied it happened. They just tried to explain it away on how it did happen. Well, it's because he's got the power of Satan in him. That's how he's able to do these things. But he was able to do these things. And honestly, this has been carried over. The next part is evidence for the miracles of Jesus outside the Bible. This has been carried over, that thinking that you can't deny the miracles, you just got to credit it to really something else. And it's interesting what we see outside of the Bible, the Babylonian Talmud. On the eve of the Passover, they hang Yeshua, and the herald went before him for 40 days, saying, Yeshua is going forth to be stoned, and that he practiced sorcery and beguiled and led astray Israel. In other words, all throughout history, from non-Christian writers, they always credit Jesus, when they're talking about Jesus, that he went around and he did some amazing things. And they don't credit it that he was the Son of God and that he got the power from God. They credit it that he got the power from evil magic or Satan or the demons, but they never refute that he did some amazing things. We also have other examples. In the Babylonian Sanhedrin 107b, if you want to get some more ancient writings, it is claimed that Jesus practiced magic. It is also reported elsewhere that healings were done in the name of Jesus. So we don't have a direct confirmation that Jesus did miracles, but you sort of have this some amazing things. Some say it was sorcery, some say it was God, but they have to have a reason to explain it because it hasn't been explained away that he didn't do anything. There was something with Jesus and doing miracles. And we have some more. Jesus of Nazarene performed sorcery and incited the masses, subverted the masses, and caused the Jewish people to sin. Here he is, he practiced sorcery. On Passover Eve, they hung the corpse of Jesus of Nazarene after they killed him by way of stoning because he practiced sorcery. The point that I would make from this material in the Jewish Talmud is from the late first century that it proves that Jesus was a person they felt that had to be dealt with. Because there was common knowledge that he was doing, or that he did some wondrous, miraculous works, some supernatural works. So even his enemies attest to it, that he was known for doing amazing supernatural things. I think that is pretty interesting. Can you think of somebody else through history that they have gone down as being a sage or a sorcerer or a miracle worker of God that has lasted for centuries? The reason why they couldn't deny Jesus doing miracles because he did it in front of people. And then even the Pharisees at the day, they couldn't bring these people up and they couldn't disprove that a miracle had been done. Because he would do miracle after miracle after miracle. And it was miracles that wasn't just like subliminal. It wasn't like if I'm going to do a miracle today, so anybody who's got a headache, your headache is going away. You could, okay, wow, my headache's going now. The thing about Jesus, he did miracles that you could actually see. They knew this guy and he was mute. He had not spoken. And all of a sudden, guess what he's doing? He's talking. He's taking people that have literally died and raised them from the dead. He's taking people that have withered hands. A physical deformity, and he healed them. Their hand was made new. And he did it in front of all these people, so you could not deny that Jesus did miracles, and his enemies of the day did not deny it. Even history after that, his enemies could never deny it. He was doing some things. We're not going to chalk it up to God. We're going to chalk it up to demons, but we can't deny that he was going around doing some amazing supernatural acts. Another thing that I'm going to look at is evidence for the resurrection. Two pieces I want to look at today is evidence that the disciples believed it and evidence that discredit other theories. First of all, very briefly, we'll look at the disciples believed it. The testimony of Paul, the oral tradition of the church, the written works of the early church. It has never been debated at all that the disciples believed that Jesus rose from the dead. You can not believe the New Testament. You could not believe in Jesus at all. But because of the writings of the disciples, you can't argue what they believed. And it is clear that they believed it. We're going to look at 1 Corinthians 15:3-8 just to get many passages we could look at, but we'll look at 1 Corinthians 15:3-8. And we'll see sort of what we're talking about here. Starting in verse 3. For what I received I pass on to you as first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. After that he appeared to more than 500 brothers at once, most of whom are still living. Though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all he appeared to me also as the one of untimely birth. And this is Paul speaking here. So there's no doubt that the disciples walked around and they confessed with their writings. They confessed to one another that they believed that Jesus had risen from the dead. And the thing about it, they not only expressed it with their words, but they demonstrated it with their lives. Here's a chart. The only thing you need to read on this chart is, how did the disciples die? Do you know how the disciples died? Then we'll zoom in a little bit. I'll read it to you if you can't read it. Bartholomew, flayed to death by a whip in Asia Minor. Why was he flayed to death by a whip in Asia Minor? Because he believed in Jesus Christ. He not only believed that Jesus was the Son of God and had risen from the dead, but he went around and was telling others about it. And the government tried to shut him up, and guess what? He kept talking. He would not be quiet about Jesus being raised from the dead and being the Son of God, to the point where they flayed him to death. Next one, Andrew, crucified on an X-shaped cross in Greece. You want to guess why he was crucified? Because of his stand for Jesus Christ. Simon, crucified in Persia. Not because he robbed a bank, not because he committed murder. It's because he would not stop preaching about Jesus Christ. About Jesus being raised from the dead, being the Son of God. James, beheaded in Palestine. Thomas, stabbed with a spear in India. Peter, crucified upside down by Nero. Sort of here, Philip, hung by iron hooks upside down. Matthias, stoned and beheaded. John died in exile on the island of Patmos. Matthew, impaled by spears in Ethiopia. James, thrown off wall and clubbed to death. Jude, crucified by Magi in Persia. Why were they all killed? Because they would not stop preaching about Jesus Christ. Before we go on, I don't know if you get the Voice of the Martyrs magazines. We had a couple that we had at the church here, and I was flipping through, and I read this quote, and it's pretty inspiring, pretty encouraging. And it was about, I think it's somebody being persecuted in Kandahar. We don't think about it. I'll tell you about in America, I do believe that there is a persecution coming, and you see it on the fringes now. It's usually not close to us. It could be even in Hollywood or at our universities. It's happening out there now. We don't see it that much in our daily lives, but it's happening, but we don't realize and don't think about it. There is persecution happening all over the world. And in Kandahar, there was some Christians that were being beat. What an awesome testimony this is. The guy that was being persecuted said, "We were not afraid at all because we had seen and studied that Jesus was beaten up. If he was beaten up, it is okay to take a beating." Wow. That's faith right there. That's faith, and it should be inspiration for us. Looking at all the disciples and what they encountered and what they went through, that should be inspiration for us. We have this mindset where Jesus wants to live our best life now, and you need to be happy, you need to be secure, and maybe you need to be wealthy. You need all these things because God's going to bless you if you're a Christian. What you don't realize, sometimes a blessing from God isn't being persecuted, isn't being beat, maybe even given up of your life. Look in the past, look at history, and see what has happened to people that are faithful to God. Consistently, we see that. But we see we see the death of the disciples, should inspire us to be faithful to God. Because one thing you can't argue with, the disciples, without a doubt, believed that Jesus is risen from the dead and that he was the Son of God. Do you remember the Branch Davidians? Happened here in Waco. I try to tell my kids at school about it, and it happened before them, so they don't have to go back and tell them from the beginning. But David Koresh was the leader of the Branch Davidians. And the government went in and caused this demise, whether it's justified or not. That can be, you can determine that. But one thing about it, once he was dead, guess what happened to his religious movement? More or less died with him. And that is what had happened all throughout history. And Jesus, even though he had a lot of people that would come to and hear him speak, he had a small group of followers. And then they saw what happened to Jesus, and he experienced one of the most cruel deaths ever, crucifixion. And they knew that was potential. If they kept following Jesus, that was going to be potential for them. And some of them even did get crucified. But they didn't let it stop them. Because in their minds, in their hearts, they believed without a doubt that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead. Now, we're going to look at some other theories that people try to use, because even historians, if they're atheist historians, they still look at this and they'll say, okay, the disciples believed it, we can't deny that. Disciples believe without a doubt that Jesus rose from the dead. But let's just go through this and see if we can think of ways to explain the thinking of a resurrection. Well, maybe somebody come and stole the body. Maybe the disciples stole the body. Could they have done that? Well, you think, well, maybe, but then again, the Roman guards were there. We think, well, maybe they could have got by the Roman guards. We think of, well, I don't know if you know your local police people or not, but I dare say getting by our local police people would be very challenging. Our police officers are very well trained, very smart individuals. They've seen stuff all the time, so they know what to expect. They know how people act. They know how the human mind thinks. So it's hard to get away with stuff. Imagine a scenario where the police officers are guarding something. Even today, that will be challenging. But one thing about it, if we do get by the police officers today, the chances of them being killed for letting us by are very slim. They wouldn't face that kind of... Maybe they would face a punishment. Maybe they'd be reprimanded a little bit. But it wouldn't be that big a deal. It wouldn't be that severe. You got to understand, in Jesus' day, the Roman guards, first of all, they were very intense. They have a strong reputation for being very cruel. But they were very, I'll say, quality soldiers. And to the point where a lot was expected of them, so much that if they were assigned an order and they were not able to follow through, many times they could pay with their very lives. So they didn't play around with things like that. So could the disciples steal the body? Probably not. But say they did steal the body. So all the disciples went and stole the body. It doesn't make rational sense, because then afterwards, they went around saying Jesus was raised from the dead. They didn't get money for that. They didn't get popularity or fame for that. What they got for that was being thrown in jail, was being beat. Then they were given opportunities. Okay, you need to recant and stop saying this, or we're going to kill you. And what happened to every one of them? Every single one of them went to their death because of this belief that Jesus rose from the dead. And you would tend to think that if they actually stole the body, they would know that it was all a lie in the first place. And maybe there could be one or two of them that just, okay, I'm going to stay faithful to the end and I'm going to carry this all the way to the end. But there's no way all of them would have just went to death on what they knew was a lie. Doesn't make any logical or rational sense. Well, somebody else stole the body. Well, there's problems there too. Who stole it? And why wasn't it ever produced? When the disciples are running around saying Jesus rose from the dead, anybody that heard that and wanted to disprove it, then all they had to do was show the body of Jesus. Because one thing you got to understand is we don't have the body of Jesus. There is no tomb that you can go to. And they'll say, behind this rock is the body of Jesus. You know, I've showed you before, there are tombs of people that lived in the Old Testament. And you can go see them. You can spend time in worship, and they usually they're in some sort of a church or different things like that, because people consider these are pretty holy. They were patriots of the Old Testament. But you can't do that with Jesus. You can't go see where his body was because it's not there anymore. Well, maybe they went to the wrong tomb. Again, pretty clear even in Scripture where the tomb was, whose tomb it was. But again, his enemies, all they had to do was produce a body. Well, y'all just went to the wrong tomb. It's over here. One thing you got to understand, all these things about Jesus being rose from the dead, this didn't come years later. This happened during the time that these people were still alive. Even we read the passage where he was saying, these people saw him and they're still alive. You can go ask them. You can go talk to them. There's a passage in the Bible where the Pharisees got the one guy who was healed. And they were asking questions. Well, how did you get healed? And is he the Son of God? And all these questions. It's like, go ask him. He's right there. When they wrote this, the people that saw Jesus were still alive, and all they had to do was go ask him. And there's a theory, you might have heard of it, the swoon theory, or that he maybe just passed out. They thought he was dead. Apparent death. I think the only people that even come up with that theory are people that don't know anything about the crucifixion, how that process works. And hopefully you've been in a service or heard a preacher that will give you the description of the crucifixion. But what happens is you can't relax when you're on the cross. When you relax, you have to pull your body up. Remember how he was attached to the cross? Nails. You have to pull your body up to catch a breath. And then when you get so tired, you relax, then you can't breathe. And then when you want another breath, you have to push your hands against the nails. It's extremely torturous. That's why they did it in the first place. But you know, we looked at all the evidence, maybe even last week or so forth. Nobody ever debates that Jesus died by crucifixion. All the historians, whether they're atheists or Jewish or whatever, they never debate that Jesus died by crucifixion. And you don't just pass out and then wake up later. He was even stabbed in the side. And then even if he passed out, he woke up later, did he ever die? Will we not have his body then somewhere? And actually, this is one of the newest explanations. What happens is atheists goes through times and critics of Jesus in the New Testament, they keep trying to come up with ideas, and they'll come up with one, and at first it sounds pretty good. With a swoon theory, maybe he just passed out, and then he came to later. And then Christians start researching, well, that doesn't make sense. We'll look at the evidence here, and look at the evidence there, and look at the evidence there. And they think, well, yeah, you're probably right. That probably didn't work. So then they try to come up with another theory. And one of the latest ones was, well, maybe, about Jesus appearing to them afterwards, maybe they all just hallucinated. A person can have hallucination. A group of people can think they saw something. Well, I thought I heard a voice and I thought I saw something flying to over here to this group of people. Over here to this group of people. Then he would even appear to individuals. And when he would appear to individuals, their lives changed completely. James, the half-brother of Jesus, this may surprise you, he was not a follower of Jesus Christ until after Jesus was crucified and then appeared to him. And he turned from a skeptic to a believer. To the point, I think he was a leader at the church in Jerusalem. So the hallucination theory doesn't make sense. There is evidence for miracles. There's evidence for the resurrection. And honestly, I just go through some of them. You can get in the weeds and you can just uncover so much more. Evidence after evidence after evidence. If you ever really just dive in and start studying, you will see that evidence is really overwhelming. There is no other logical explanation except, yes, in Jesus' ministry, he did miracles, and as he resurrected from the dead. It's like, well, why doesn't everybody believe it? Well, most people don't do the research. And a lot of people aren't open to truth. Most people believe today what they want to believe. Well, I think this happened. I had somebody call me the other day, and they wanted, well, what do you think about this? It's like, well, really doesn't matter what I think. let's start with, first of all, what does the Bible say about it? Because that's where we need to start. It's not about what I think. It's not about what somebody else thinks. It's what is true. And as you look at it over and over again, you will see there's so much evidence to confirm that the New Testament is true. But you know what the best evidence is that the New Testament is true? Is a difference that God makes in our lives. Because we look back now and we see the disciples, and one of the most amazing things, that's why nobody can debate that they believe that Jesus rose from the dead, because we see the change that was made in them. They went from running away, hiding, thinking they were going to be crucified, to in the streets preaching, willingly allowing them to be crucified because of an encounter they had with Jesus Christ. The best evidence we can give to our dark and dying world that the Bible's true, it's not facts and figures, it's not ancient manuscripts, it's not evidence for miracles, it's not even evidence for the resurrection. But it's evidence that Jesus Christ of the New Testament has changed our lives. How are we different? And again, we get caught up in our modern day Christianity, and we'll just say, well, I said a prayer one time and I got baptized. That is not being a Christian. And I say that over and over again. I will constantly say that because I felt like, maybe it's the same for you, I felt like that's sort of what I was told my whole life. That is what makes you a Christian. What makes you a Christian is your faith in Jesus Christ. And when you ask Jesus to come into your heart and you put your faith in Him, what happens is the journey begins. You're not perfect. The journey begins and God starts working in your life.